everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to bring you my long-awaited video. I don't know about you all, but this is like one of my favorite videos anytime I see it on Booktube because I am a little stats dork. But we are going to talk about all the books that I read in 2020, my year in reading of 2020, and we're going to talk about some statistics here. Nothing crazy, don't worry, this is not a math lesson. We're just going to talk a little bit about the number of books I read, the kinds of books that I read, the distribution of genres and audience and all that good stuff. And then we're going to talk briefly about any of my future changes that I might want to make to these. So without further ado, let's dive in. So let's start by chatting about the just kind of general totals and stats of the number of books that I read this year. So in 2020, my reading goal started very, very low actually on Goodreads because I wasn't exactly sure how much reading I was going to be doing. Previous years, since college, I just have not been doing very much reading, and I actually looked back at my 2020 goals the other day and I saw written in my little journal that I wanted to originally read at least 12 books, which is very cute. I think that was perfect. A book a month. I ended up reading a lot more than that, and so incrementally kind of throughout the year, every time I sort of met a goal, I added another 10 books to it. So when I reached 12, I said, okay, maybe my goal should be 20. When I reached 20, I thought, okay, maybe my goal should be 30, etc., etc. In the end, my goal was 50 books this year, and I read 47. So I didn't quite make it. I think if I had been reading at the same speed throughout December as I had been for the rest of the year, that I probably would have reached that goal. But honestly, I'm happy with 47 books. I think that's pretty great. The total number of genres that I read across was actually 10 different genres, which I am pretty proud of personally. I think that's pretty great. You will all know if you're following my story here on Booktube that I am a big fantasy fan. I love my fantasy genre, but I also like branching out a little bit. I like my historical fiction sometimes. I like my romance sometimes. Nonfiction is my babe, especially when it's sort of like scientific nonfiction. So yeah, 10 total genres, which is pretty good. And then the number of authors that I read this year was 38. So 38 total authors, pretty good. This is sort of explanatory because of series, things like N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy. Obviously, that's 3 books for one author. Anything by Sarah J. Maas, which I've read a few of this year, is just going to be one author, etc., etc. Plus, just being a fantasy reader, oftentimes you are inundated with series on series on series. So honestly, 38 authors for 47 books is pretty good in my opinion, and still allowed me to get out and test many, many, many new authors this year, which I'm really proud of. So let's talk about the distribution of my books that I read this year. So because I love my stats, I kind of made up some little graphs and charts and things of the reading that I did this year so that it's more clear to the eye for anybody who wants to take a look. So let's delve on into it. I have a few different representations of the distributions of things that I read this year. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is my distribution of genres that I read. So you'll remember I said that I read a total of 10 genres this year of books, and let's chat about the spread of those genres. So if you saw my how I organize my reading video, you will see that one of the main ways that I organize my reading is through Notion, the online website, and I am obsessed with Notion. I love them so much. Not sponsored, but seriously, it's a great note-taking platform. One of the reasons that I love Notion so much is that if you ever make a database in Notion, you can export it as a CSV file, and so you can import it into any sort of like Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel or anything like that, any programs like that where you may want to perform different formulas or make any charts or anything like that from the information that you have from Notion. So in Notion, I track all of my reading for the year, and I put in the genre, subgenre, name of the book, audience that the book is intended for, the author, number of pages, my rating that I gave it, the date that I finished it, and the month that I finished the book. So let's actually first talk about the spread of genres for this year. So we're gonna kind of talk about this section right here. So for this year, like I said, I read a total of 10 genres. And so I want to actually see all of these, please. Alrighty. So the number of genres that I read, as I said, is 10. My largest genre was, of course, fantasy. As you can see right here, 55% of the books that I read this year were fantasy books. The actual number of fantasy books that I read was about 25 or 26, I believe. Let me see here. Yep, 26 books that I read. Yes, so fantasy was my largest genre at 55% of the books that I read, i.e. 26 books this year. My next largest genre was nonfiction, actually, which makes most sense. Like I said, I love my sort of like sciencey nonfiction books. I love a good self-help book, a nice book about meditation, things like that. Plus, I read Sapiens at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of 2020, which was quite a feat. So yeah, the number of books that I read in the nonfiction realm was 12% of my reading, and that ended up being 6 books total. Next, you can kind of follow down. It looks like I have memory. Hey, psst, psst, stop. Sorry, my cat is getting very excited and wanted to pull on the curtains. Those curtains are not for you. No, no, no. Nuh-uh. I know you want to play, but you just wait a little bit longer, okay? I know, I know. She's so cute. So anyway, yep, you can see that, as I said, fantasy was my most read genre, followed by nonfiction, and then we have sort of, we have mystery, romance, a little bit of classics, all kind of together in the more common books for me to read, all averaging out at about between 6 and 8% of my reads, which for 47 books isn't actually a lot. It basically is about 3 books. So I ended up reading 3 romances this year, 4 mystery books, and 3 classics, which is pretty good for me, seeing as I hadn't read any classics since high school. And honestly, the classics that I ended up reading this year, I really enjoyed. It was like Picture of Dorian Gray. Oh my God, my cat is wild right now. But yeah, the classics that I ended up reading this year were like Picture of Dorian Gray. I also read Phantom of the Opera, and oh, I read Dead Poets Society, and I also read a poetry book by Rilke. So I guess that's all kind of like in the classics realm, although I put Rilke's under specifically poetry and not classics. So anyway, so my spread of genres is pretty good. Let's go ahead and look at some of the genres that I didn't read as many of this year that maybe I would like to read more of next year. So one of them is dystopian fiction. I only read 1 dystopian fiction novel this year, and that was Scythe. I've heard it described as a fantasy story before, but I personally just sort of like disagreed with that genre label of Scythe. And I read it and I enjoyed it. I personally love dystopian fiction. It has been one of my favorite genres for honestly ages, but Scythe, I didn't love the ending. If anybody wants to hear about like maybe some books that are really popularized that I didn't love as much, I would chat a little bit more about my opinions of Scythe. But maybe I'll get a little bit more into dystopian fiction again this year. We'll see. The other book genre that I didn't read that much of is kind of a general genre of nonfiction social justice that I put down separately from nonfiction. So personally, a goal of mine is to sort of branch more into things like social justice, poverty, race, discussions of socioeconomic crises and things like that among people. And I read So You Want to Talk About Race this year by Ijoma Oluo this year, and it was honestly great. But this year I'm hoping to read a little bit more of the social justice genre for the upcoming year. Another genre that I read only 1 book of last year is poetry, like I mentioned, for Rilke, so hopefully I'll expand more into that this upcoming year. Also, memoirs and historical fiction. I read Daisy Jones and the Six, which is technically a historical fiction, and I read Michelle Obama's Becoming, which is a memoir. I mentioned when I talked about that book, about Becoming, that I really would love to read more memoirs this year, and actually one is in my January TBR. So if you haven't seen that video, go ahead and check it out. By the time I release this video, it will definitely have been posted. So go check out my January TBR because I'm pretty excited. We've got a little slew of different genres in that one. So yeah, 10 genres for 2020, not half bad. Fantasy will always be my pride and joy, will always be my true love. But I'm hoping maybe that this year I can branch out a little bit more, read maybe a little bit more romance, honestly. I don't know, every time I read a romance, I'm like, oh my god, I love it so much, but I just never like feel in the mood for it. It's only like once I've read it where I've been like, wow, that was incredible. So maybe I need to like give myself some more romance this year. Who knows? And then more social justice and more poetry. I think those are my big challenges for myself this year. Alrighty, so that was a nice long discussion of my genre distributions for this last year. Let's now move on to audience. So let's go ahead and look at the spreads. So yes, the #1 genre that I read this year was adult. And if we go ahead and do this, we can see that 66% of the books that I read this year were adult. And if I want to, all right, so yes, as we can see here, 66% of the books that I read this year were adult, which averages out at about 31 books that I read this year. Then after that was young adult, which was 25% of the books that I read, which is 12 books. And then middle grade, which is 4. And honestly, the only middle grade books that I read this year were Harry Potter. And that's because I'm going through the whole series again. I've been adoring it. Honestly, before I even started filming this, I was listening to Harry Potter. I've been listening to it all day. It has just been such a huge comfort for me throughout the holiday season recently, and I'm listening to all the audiobooks on Libby, and it's just great. So yeah, another funny thing that I'm looking at here is that it felt like I was reading a lot more young adult books, a lot more YA books than I realized I was throughout the year. Every time I read a YA book, it feels so strongly atmospheric, and I just get so pulled into it that I feel like I have just been immersed in YA-ness forever. So I actually thought that I had read a lot more YA books than I actually did this year, which is kind of reassuring because I want to like branch into the adult realm. I want to be able to read adult books, but man, like YA fantasy will always get me. So anyway, yeah, that is my audience spread. I would say that's pretty good. I'm not really sure if I want to change anything about that. I could say that maybe to be more well-rounded, I would want to read more middle grade books, but honestly, what I read this year as far as audience is concerned is pretty much exactly what I want to be reading. This is pretty indicative of just exactly what my taste in books is, which is pretty cool. Alrighty, so let's move on now. We will just do really quickly, I'll just show you a little bit of my general tracking of my reading for this last year in Notion. So as you can see here, this is my list of all of the books that I read this last year, all the way down. We have the countdown here. So this one says 47, exactly like I said, 47 books read, unique 38 as in unique authors, and the unique number of genres, which is 10. Looks like the sum of pages is minus Naomi Novik's Deadly Education, which is about 300. So just under 20,000 pages, which is honestly pretty cool. And yeah, my general distribution across the months, if anybody's interested, I will show you really quickly because I personally find it interesting. So at the beginning of the year, I started off pretty slowly, was just kind of reading some audiobooks. I was doing a lot of working, audiobooks for Harry Potter, Sapiens, and Wherever You Go, There You Are. Then in March, I sort of delved into reading a little bit more. Spring break happened, and then quarantine happened, and I really delved back into my reading love. So with that, I slowly sort of built up steam over April, May, and June, and then July, August, September, October came around, and we just went ham, y'all. I loved the reading. I loved it so much these past few months. It's been great. November was a big dark academia sort of classics time, and then December was a little bit of like a reading hangover from November, honestly. And also just, like I said, the holidays happened, so I read very few books this last December. That is pretty much the end of this video. If you're ever interested in anything more about my reading stats, I love to talk about it. I think it's super interesting. Let me know what your reading stats were this year. How many books did you read? Are you happy with that? Are you wanting to read more or less next year? I will be coming out with a 2021 reading goals video pretty soon, so you can look forward to that, and I will discuss more in detail of some actual achievable goals for my reading for this next year. Honestly, 47 out of 50 books, I am really pleased with that. I was gonna be pleased this last year if I read 12 books, and previously I had read 1 book the year before, so read whatever you wanna read, y'all. That's the brand here, is just do what you wanna do. We're all here for fun, so enjoy your reading. Happy reading, everybody. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe down below, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!